Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel Links deck profile. Today we're taking a look at Seven's Paladin or Spellcaster Fusion, which is one of the new fusion decks introduced with the release of Go Rush World. So first things first, we'll talk about the skill, Seven's Star Road. So this skill is actually really good. So requirement can be activated if all the monsters with 1400 or more attack in your constructed deck are spellcaster type monsters, and all the monsters in your constructed extra deck are dark type monsters. So this is fine. This isn't even that restrictive because there's a lot of very useful cards that have under 1400 attack, which we can include, but just aren't spellcasters. Multi-choice effect, if we have a Swordsman of Roadstar face up on our field, so it doesn't have to be summoned this turn, we just have to have it face up on the field, and that is quite important. Either add one fusion from your deck or graveyard to your hand, so because of this we only have to run one copy of fusion because we can infinitely recycle it from the graveyard, or add one 7's Red Magician from your deck to your hand. So we cannot just run one 7's Red Magician because this only searches from deck, so we have to still max out on this if we want maximum consistency, I suppose. But this skill is basically always a free +1, and being able to search a boss monster or a very integral combo piece is extremely good. Or we can choose one face-up 7's Red Witch on your field. This turn, that monster inflicts piercing damage, and that is also a very important effect because this basically means the deck natively has a way to beat set 3 pass. If your opponent just walls up, we can still chip damage through with 7's Red Witch, which means they cannot just stall out until they draw what they need to out our board, which does put a clock on the game, which is very good. So, I guess we'll talk about our first boss monster, 7's Red Magician. Everyone should know what this card does by now. It's very good. The downside of this card, it has a low attack value. The plus side of this card, it can go up to 39, which is really strong. Milling the top card of your deck is also pretty cool, and this card combos with so many other cards in the deck, including the deck's primary boss monster, 7's Paladin. So this is a magical knight monster, so not a spellcaster, so anything with spellcasters won't work with this card. Made using 7's Red Magician and the Swordsman of Roadstar. So we can send the top card of a deck to the graveyard to activate its multi-choice effect, and we can either gain attack equal to the number of different attributes in both players' graveyards, again very important distinction, times 400, so better than 7's Red Magician. This caps out at 53, and 53 is quite a lot considering we only have 6,000 life points. Or we can shuffle one monster from our graveyard into the deck, which again can be really important. We can use this to shuffle back in the 7's Red Magician, and then we can summon out a Swordsman of Roadstar and search it out if we really need to. But we get to draw one card. So basically, the way this works is, if you know your attack isn't going to get through, so for example, you know your opponent has a negate attack, there's no point in boosting your 7's Paladin's attack up, so you might as well get the draw. Or if you think you're going to die in the following turn and you need to dig for an answer, either like an extra body to put on the field or a trap card of your own, such as your own negate attack, again, we go for that draw. But a lot of the time, we'll just be boosting our attack because hit with big number real good. So 7's Paladin, really powerful, and thanks to the skill, we can make this very easily. Thanks to our Swordsman of Roadstar, we can just get the search on the SRM or the Fusion, which is just really good. Next up, we'll talk about 7's Road Witch. So we can send one card from our hand to the graveyard to special summon a level 7 or higher dark attribute spellcaster monster from our hand face up to our field. If we special summon 7's Red Magician by this effect, this card gains 400 attack. So this card doesn't have the same kind of synergy it does in 7's Axel Road, where we can boost its attack up to 2800, but it's still very good in this deck. If we use 7's Road Sorcerer to summon out the SRM, we can get back an SRW for free, which is really good. On top of the fact, 7's Red Witch can just, again, cheat out 7's Red Magician, which is already pretty valuable. I mean, it's not the craziest play in the world, but it's still really strong. It has the synergy with the skill, so we want to be running 3 of this card anyway to find piercing, and we want to be playing 3 copies of it because we want 7's Red Sorcerer to be online all the time. But one of the really good plays we can make is we can summon out the Sorcerer, then summon out a Roadstar and another monster, or just summon out 3 monsters and have a Roadstar in hand already. Use the effect, bring back the 7's Red Magician, bring back 7's Road Witch, then we either summon the Roadstar or we summon the Roadstar initially to get out 7's Red Sorcerer, depending on how many normal summons we have in hand. Use the skill, search the second SRM, then use the 7's Red Witch we've brought back's effect to special summon the SRM from hand, and we end on a board of double SRM and SRW, which is so valuable. That is just such a strong board made from practically nothing, and it's one of this deck's key combos. Next up, All-Seeing Harvey. So this is a selection box card, and I know a lot of people won't like that, but All-Seeing Harvey is really good. So 1300 attack, 1000 defense, really good stats, and importantly, under that 1400. During the main phase that we have normal or special summon this card, we can look at one face down card on the opponent's field. If that card is a monster card with 1500 or more defense, we can destroy it. So if we use this effect on a monster, most of the time it won't actually kill it. Now there are some situations where it will, but most of the time, that's not what this card is going to be doing. What we can do is look at our opponent's defense value and then basically be able to better choose our attacks. So for example, if we had a low attack monster, such as, for example, an Essel, and we look at our opponent's face down defense, and we see that it's got 900 or less defense, we can swing into that with Essel and not have to worry about bumping off of it and taking some reflect damage and clearing our opponent's board. But more importantly, we can use this card to look at our opponent's back row. And if we have a magical stream, we can kind of treat this a little bit like Jump Check, where we can look at one of them and then go, okay, that's the threat, I need to pop it. Or that's not a threat, I'll pop one of the other cards. So very, very, very powerful card. And on top of all of that, it also combos really well with Siesta Torero. Siesta Torero can flip a level 8 monster face down. Assuming that monster has 1500 or more defense, we can then pop it. So this gets rid of a lot of boss monsters, and more specifically, some of the more popular ones that we're running into right now. Cyber Twin Dragon will just get popped by this combo. Cyber Assault Dragon gets popped by this combo. Dragius, which we see running around a little bit, will also get popped by this combo. There is just a lot of cards running around right now which will lose to this. Now, this won't work on fusions, so that's quite a big negative, but it works on just about everything else, and getting a free card out the way is really, really good. We've already spoken about Sorcerer a little bit, but this card is just incredible. Send 3 face-up monsters from your field to the graveyard. Special summon level 7 or lower spellcaster type monster from your graveyard face up to your field. If you special summon 7's Road Magician by this effect, you can special summon a 7's Road Witch from your graveyard. So again, having access to 7's Road Magician from the grave is really, really good and really, really important. Basically, if we open Sorcerer, then 2 other normals, and a Swordsman of Roadstar, that's basically full combo. We can either go into our fusion, or we can make the board we spoke about earlier, which is 2 7's Road Magician and the 7's Road Witch, which again is really, really good. So Sorcerer, unbelievably important for this deck. Then we're on to Thunder Gazelle. So Thunder Gazelle is a card that people have been playing in SAR for a little bit. It's got multiple uses. It's a fire attribute monster, and we want to have all the attributes to get our effects off. It has a decent attack value in 1300, which means again it's under that 1400. It allows us to shuffle monsters back from our graveyard into the deck, so we can reuse them. One of the key ones that we're probably using with that is going to be the SRM, but also putting back Roadstar and Sorcerer can be really, really good. And it occasionally will give us piercing, and when we have a guy that has like 5300 attack and piercing, that can just be a game ender on its own. So Thunder Gazelle is really, really important for this deck. Then there's Essel, and I know a lot of people really hate this card. I'm one of them, really. But Essel is really, really good in this deck. So getting out a free body is always going to be really, really useful, but we also need to turbo the graveyard. We need to get all the different attributes in the graveyard themselves, but we also want to get Witch and Magician into the graveyard as soon as possible. So if we can use Essel to get both of these into the graveyard, that basically sets up our Sorcerer, which basically sets up the whole game. So Essel, really, really important, and it is another light monster. Then we have Siesta Torero. We've already spoken a little bit about this card, but again, putting cards back in the deck, really valuable. Flipping cards face down, we can just attack over them, or again, we can pop them in Harvey. It's also a water attribute, so it just works in so many different ways. Then we have the Ultimate Flag Beast Boltracorn. Again, we're just seeing all of our kind of good stuff cards. Boltracorn being able to turn off your opponent's back row is always going to be really, really good. We don't really need 7 light monsters, but we don't want to turn this card down because it's just that good. And then we're just playing the one of Aero Sorcerer. I've actually thought about cutting this card because it's just a one of. It's a 1500 beat, which is okay. The only real reason it's in here is because it's wind. There isn't really much more to say about it other than that. I wonder if having the one of wind is better than just having another copy of Harvey or Siesta Torero, because those cards are both very, very good. Whereas Aero Sorcerer is in here basically just to be a wind in the graveyard. And then finally, Swordsman of Roadstar, again, the key combo piece of the deck, thanks to our skill. Now, notably, we can just use our skill to basically plus. We can just search out a fusion, set it on the field. If we add it to our hand and then set our hand, we're basically hiding a fusion in amongst there, which means our opponent might pop the fusion and not one of our important back row, which can be really, really valuable as well. Or again, we can use this to go full combo and go into our 7th Paladin, which is a pretty cool boss. So Swordsman of Roadstar is definitely the heart of the deck. The next up, we'll talk about our legend, the Warrior Returning Alive. So the Warrior Returning Alive does actually have multiple uses in this deck. We are playing Harvey, we are playing Torero, and more importantly, we're playing Roadstar. So it does have 7 different targets in the deck. The Warrior Returning Alive specifically is primarily going to be getting us back Swordsman of Roadstar, and Swordsman of Roadstar are just that important. Basically, the deck revolves around Swordsman of Roadstar, so we just want to have access to this card as much as possible. Realistically, you could play Tribute to the Doomed if you're worried about that, but this deck can get to such high attack values, I don't really think it's necessary. And we have multiple ways to get piercing, so again, I don't think it's super necessary. Or you could go Shield and Sword. This is a bit win more This can let you like steal games if your opponent has low defense monsters. It can be really good, especially if your opponent's playing something that's a lot of 0 defenses. But overall, I prefer the consistency that the Warrior Returning Alive gives, so I've gone with that. Then there is Magical Stream. Again, getting Backer out of the way is very, very important, and we've already said it does combo quite well with All-Seeing Harvey. At heart, this is a very aggressive, make big number slam in deck, and getting stopped by trap cards really hurts this kind of deck. We're on the 1 copy of Fusion because we only need the 1 because of the skill, and then we're on Negate Attack and Slime because these are just basically mandatory. So Negate Attack could be swapped out with Widespread. The only time Widespread's going to probably be bad is going to be specifically against Maximums and Secret Order. Now, those decks are still going to be running around, and that's why we have gone for Negate Attacks. It's just better in more situations, but getting rid of a boss monster could also be really, really strong, so I think Widespread Ruin is actually a decent pick for this meta. So, what are some other cards we're not including? We're not including Seven's Rogue Mage, and that's because I want more cards that, 1, are different attributes, and 2, are more useful outside of doing just one little thing. Plus, Seven's Rogue Mage has quite low attack value, so I don't like leaving it on the field. And for a similar reason, we're not playing Talismanic Seal Array. I like having a small number of spell traps, because that means that our monsters typically do get to come out a little bit easier. We don't brick on spell traps quite so much. And this deck really wants to be filling up every monster zone every turn if possible. I also don't think we need Talismanic Seal Array. So TSA is a really strong card in this deck, because we can lower an opponent's monster's attack, then boost our attack really high, slam into it, and try and like OTK our opponent and get an absolute ridiculous amount of damage in. But I think we will lose out on consistency by doing that. So basically, for me, it came down to, do I want to high roll and completely obliterate my opponent? Or do I want to not have to high roll? We can low roll and still win the game. We can still close it out, but it's going to be a little bit more uphill. I always personally prefer consistency over like deck ceiling. So that's why we have chosen to not include this card. Then there's also things like Mystic Dealer, which is another really good card and does work quite well in here, but again, monster space is really tight, and personally I really like the Siesta Torero and All-Seeing Harvey package over the sometimes useful Dealer. Then there's Light Sorcerer Sanctity. Again, it would basically be a choice between this or Essel, or messing up all the attributes. I don't really think we need a slight power reduction. I think we're past the point of this deck at the very least needing that. And then there's just some of the other attribute mages, such as Flare Sorcerer, such as Earth Sorcerer, but again, we're playing the Harvey and we're playing the Thunder Gazelle, so we really don't need them. But how does the deck perform? This deck is really good. This deck actually can struggle to brick. The only way this deck really bricks is if we just open a hand that's full spell traps or just all boss monsters. Now, that does sound quite bad, but it's quite easy to unbrick this deck. So in that regard, it's not actually that bad. This deck basically gets to play with an extra card each turn as well. As long as we can find our Roadstar, we get a free +1, which will either be the Seven's Rogue Magician or the Fusion, which is, again, really good. The deck's able to make absolutely ridiculous numbers. We're able to make these absolutely ridiculous boards, and we can close out games very, very quickly. This deck doesn't really have, in my opinion, a particularly bad matchup. Now, there are some decks that will just naturally beat us up, right? I think Matarian is going to be one of the big ones. I think, realistically, Royal Rebels is probably another one, because this deck is going to go wide. We're almost always just going to have 3 monsters in attack mode on the board and try and push in for as much damage as possible each turn, which is very punishable. But outside of those exactly, I wouldn't say this deck has any really horrific matchups. And I will say as well, this deck is very fun to play. So if you're able to just find SRM and SRW early, get them both in the graveyard, anytime you find a sorcerer, it's basically full combo, right? It's so good. So there is a little bit of high roll in this deck still, and you still obviously can brick, but you can brick with any deck. Overall though, I'd say this deck is fairly consistent, it's fairly fun, and it's fairly powerful. So if you're looking for something a little bit different, if you're getting a little bit bored of Sidra meta, this is definitely a really good deck to pick up. This deck has already won a tournament and is placing quite highly in a lot of others, so it's already proven itself to be quite a strong deck. But let's find some replays so I can show you what I've been talking about.
ラッシュデュエル